Welcome to today's program from the Commonwealth Club. You can find more of our programs at commonwealthclub.org/online. I'm John Zipper, the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial, and your co-host for today. We're presenting a discussion on racial inequality and Pride Month. 4 months ago, no one would have predicted that by now we would have 40 million unemployed and an economy in free fall, a deadly pandemic raging across the country and around the world, and millions of people mobilized into massive protest marches in nearly every city and even many small towns. But what people have predicted for years is that the deep-seated structural racism, discrimination, and violence against African Americans would have to be dealt with. The recent killings of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery are only two such senseless deaths in a long, long list. It's a topic we've discussed here on the Michelle Meow Show at the Commonwealth Club a number of times, and today we're going to discuss it with some community leaders in light of June being Pride Month. Now, Michelle Meow is the host of the Michelle Meow Show and a member of the Commonwealth Club's Board of Governors. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this special program. Some of you may have been planning to tune in at this hour to have a discussion with Cameron Esposito with a new biography or a new memoir that she put out, but we are postponing that due to where we're at, the climate, the conditions that we're in, and also here on the program, it's important for us to check in with our family members. So that's what we're doing. I'm pleased to introduce to you our panelists today. Aria Saeed is back, who's the co-founder and executive director of Compton's Transgender Cultural District. Natalie Thompson, who's the vice president of records management and also of Capital Pride Alliance of Washington, D.C., also the vice president and global outreach for Interpride and International and global community and the secretariat and co-chair for Global Pride. We also have Carolyn Weisinger back. Thank you for always accepting our invitation to come back, and you do some great work here at the club. Board president, San Francisco Pride, and also the host of the C-Dub show. Thank you, family, for joining us today. I think the first question, we can't talk about anything else other than to check in with all of you and make sure, we ask this very important question: how are you doing? How are you holding up? Let's start with Carolyn.
I would say that I'm a bit exhausted. This is the time that's always busy for most of us for Pride Month. And I think it's a little bit busier because, we really want to do things like we're doing today as far as elevating, Black voices, Black LGBTQ voices. And, the question became, well, should we postpone Pride? Absolutely, we shouldn't post Pride. Instead, we should be having conversations like this where we talk about how Pride and the Black liberation struggle are intimately linked. So, doing that work is a lot, in addition to the, everyday logistics work of Pride Month. So a little bit tired, but I'm happy to be able to do this work. So, yeah.
Natalie.
I think what Carolyn said was absolutely perfect. We have to address what's going on within our community, the intersections of our community. We all are so intertwined and so interconnected that it's important to talk about how there are Black LGBTQ lives that matter and they are part of the same struggle. And so how I'm feeling right now is that this is not the time to be silent. This is not the time to do nothing. This is the time to be active. And this is a requirement of everybody, in my opinion, that there's so much work to be done and we all have a part to play. And that doesn't mean you have to be at a protest, but share resources, talk to a friend, learn something new that you didn't know before, be open and willing to have these types of discussions so that we can be a better world.
And Aria.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. I think I'm in a space, I think I actually shared this with you yesterday, Michelle, but where I'm having moments of extreme joy and in moments of grief and in rage is definitely consistent. And it's a very complex time to be in America and witnessing the consistent injustice, but it's also amazing to witness how this time around so many people are coming forward in solidarity and having very intentional conversations with their people on how to shift the culture that we currently have. And not just sort of legislative injustice or like a culture of violence against Black people and disenfranchisement and oppression, but also how there needs to be a shift in the atmosphere going forward. That it can't stop with the protest. That the protest is actually the precursor for the next phase of our era, of our culture to really change.
John? I think John's muted.
We've talked about police killings for years of African-American men and women. There were a number of protests, of course, around the Ferguson, Missouri case. Why do you think now this has, again, like you said, Aria just said, not just gotten people out in the streets, but seems to actually have people having these communications and these talks that maybe they weren't having before? Is it because, frankly, we're stuck at home, we have no jobs to go to? We really, more people than just the people who have been discriminated against for years and years and years are suddenly feeling very vulnerable and a kinship with perhaps people who have been going through even worse stuff, or even, that's more a question. I don't mean to give that as an answer, but why do you think this happened now?
For me, I think we've seen tons of videos, right? And I think violence against Black people and murder of Black people has become so normalized through sort of these tapings and video shares and Facebook live streams or what have you of murder. But I think this one in particular of George Floyd, watching a man unarmed, literally, and watching someone intentionally murder a man and that man screaming out for his deceased mom, it did something to people. I think people's humanity got attached in this is absolutely wrong, because there's also been a tendency whenever Black people are murdered by the state to justify the action of the state, right? So it's like, oh, well, Mike Brown possibly had a weapon, or Trayvon Martin had a hoodie, or, you know what I mean? Like, there's always been these ways where there's been an insert of, well, they were up to no good, and if this, then that. And there was no denying it in this particular instance with George Floyd being murdered on camera. There was no denial, and I think people were activated to respond. Is my opinion.
Natalie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a number of things. I think people have been cooped up and they're starting to pay a little bit more attention to the news. It's just, we're inundated with news right now. And so when this happened, you've got people with a bit more time on their hands or wanting to escape. And then this is the information that they're given. And I do agree, this was one of those undeniable situations where this was unacceptable. There was no denying it. And you still hear people talking about, well, he could have had something in his system, or he was a criminal, or, he has all these children coming out and saying, oh, I miss my dad, but he wasn't a good father. And it's just everything that, we hear, people are trying to discredit what actually happened. And this man was murdered. There's no denying that. This was unacceptable. But there's always going to be people who want to play the, devil's advocate card and say, well, maybe he deserved it. And I think in this case, it's really hard to play that card. And I think people are just really starting to pay attention because it's happening all the time. And there comes a point where you're just like, enough is enough. And I think more people are beginning to recognize that maybe I was ignorant to what's happening in this world. Maybe I didn't have a clear perspective of what's going on. And now I speak about, non-people of color. They're starting to see, maybe I wasn't aware. And maybe this is the time I really need to take notice and say, okay, this is wrong. And you see it happening around the world with, marches and solidarity from around the world, that people are paying attention and they're also having the opportunity to tell their stories, because this isn't just an American issue. This is a worldwide issue that people all over face. And so, unfortunately, this happened, but I think that we are at a breaking point where we can actually make some tangible change.
Carolyn?
I think that I've actually struggled with that question a bit. I was saying how I have been a bit stoic at times because, I'm at 41, I've seen so many videos of so many people that have been murdered to me, which have been undeniable. But yes, we spend an awful lot of time with the state trying to discredit them, with their family members having to defend them, in death, about how, a person selling CDs on the street doesn't mean that you should choke them out, et cetera, et cetera. So, I've felt a bit of anger about people who are just now getting it. But I think that as far as the reason so many people have been activated, I think we can't underestimate the addition of coronavirus. Like Natalie said, so many people have been cooped up. So many people are at home just sitting in front of computers and sitting in front of TVs and watching this video or reading articles. So many people who are now getting unemployment and have time they got, as we say in the internet, they got time. They got all the time in the world to go out and protest. But I think one question that we've been particularly asking is, what has it been about George Floyd's death that has activated so many non-Black people? I come from a little bitty town in Louisiana. It's one of those towns where they imagine that they don't have racial injustice and they don't have problems, even though last year, or maybe it was the year before that, if you've ever seen the video of the young man who was hit on the highway while he was changing a tire and drugged, that was in my hometown in Louisiana. And this was the first time that they ever actually had basically a die-in in this little bitty town. And you really saw a lot of these rural white people, not defending the death, but actually defending the Black people who were standing up, which shocked me. So, I don't really know the answer, but something about this it might be a new generation who has more access to information. I saw a video of a young white girl arguing with her parents. I've never seen anything like that before, but it reminds me of kids who I've taught in school. So I think there's a lot of different reasons why this particular death at this time, when so many people were able to watch it, so many people to have access to information, just contributed to a kind of combustion of sorts.
Michelle?
Carolyn and Natalie, and you and already brought up a couple points, especially around June 1st is LGBTQI Pride Month. And certainly, a lot of LGBTQ organizations have stepped up, put out statements of solidarity, even through social media, had participated in Blackout Tuesday. Would love to hear kind of what your emotions were and what you're feeling with regards to the solidarity statements. And, how do we expand upon that? Because I think it's different, when your discrimination exceeds or it's more than, discrimination of sexual orientation, gender identity, and so on. We'll start with Natalie.
There are mixed emotions around that. I love the solidarity and I love the coming together. But for me, it's not enough to send out a statement. There's got to be action behind it. And so I had this conversation with the groups that I'm in. We can sit here and we can put out a statement in solidarity and say that we support Black lives and that we're here to help. But if there's no action, then the statement is worthless. And so I'm waiting to see what these organizations and these pride groups do moving forward to say that we're going to put some action behind our words. And I know that the groups that I'm a part of, we are actively inside those conversations right now to look at how we could potentially be contributing to some of this, to some of these issues and what we need to do. How are we going to assess our relationships with certain partnerships? How are we going to assess our relationships with the police? And that's the reason why I joined the organization that I joined, because I think it's important that if you want to be a part of the change, we need people on the inside as well as we need people on the outside. We need somewhere in the middle. And one of the things that we have to address are, does everyone feel safe? Does everyone feel heard? Does everyone feel like this is for them, that they have a seat at the table? And if they don't, then there's work for us to do. And that is something that I'm here to do.
Aria?
Yeah, so the question was about orgs making statements in, can you repeat it for me?
Yeah, sure, no problem. This is all happening and buttoning up on upon Pride Month, and so to be LGBTQI, and then also to be African American, while all of our Pride organizations and other LGBTQ organizations are putting out statements of solidarity. How do you react to that when your discrimination and your lived experiences isn't just limited to just sexual orientation and gender identity?
I'm gonna be slightly unfiltered. A lot of these organizations do not care about Black lives, and that sharing the Black Lives Matter statement or crafting a statement is just trendy, right? It's to save face, so that their constituents and their communities and their funders and donors and what have you feel good about the organization during this time and its ability to weather a climate shift that we're having, where we're actually asking for accountability, not just from the state, but also from people who proclaim to support. And so for me, I'm like, if you're posting a statement on, your solidarity with Black Lives Matter, I want to see the receipts. I want to see who's on the board. I want to see who the Black folks are in leadership. And it better be more than just one. It better be more than just one. For me, I think we're in a space right now where these organizations, and I'm going to bring them in, they need to actually craft a statement of what they will be doing going forward with the education that's happening. It's not enough to make a statement, not for me. And as a Black trans woman, often, for me, I can only speak of my industry, and I work in social justice and nonprofit specifically. And there has been a level of anti-Blackness in San Francisco, in San Francisco city government, and its nonprofit culture that has been going on long before I was born, and has made it very difficult for work that centers Black people to actually come to fruition. And often the statement is, oh, well, our deliverables, we'll hire Black outreach people to do outreach or what have you, and work with Black community. And it's not enough. I'm not buying it. It's still 2020, even though 2020 has been a really crazy year for all of us and not the year that we thought it would be. I don't think it's enough. I think there has to be actionable items that these organizations are going to implement within their own structure, within their own governance, and how they're also going to create a culture that supports Black folks in that space, and Black trans people and Black queer women. And do you know what I mean? That's my stance. And so for any organization that's posted it, I have asked, you have 48 hours to post a screenshot of your board and their demographics. And, obviously folks don't do that, but they, it's trendy to post, we're in solidarity. Don't look at us. Don't look at us. We're with you all. And if you're going to be with us, you need to really be with us.
There we have it. Aria just opened the floodgates. So Carolyn, add to that.
Well, I would first say, to Aria's point about being trendy, it's like during riots when people paint Black owned on their business not to get burned down. It's kind of the same thing. And I think the most interesting thing, going back to what I said earlier, or maybe I didn't say it, maybe I'm getting all my events confused. It was so interesting that when I first did multiple statements from San Francisco Pride. We did my own statement, and then there was another statement from Fred Lopez, our executive director. And it was shocking to me how many people didn't know the true story of Stonewall. And it was only shocking to me for about 5 minutes, because as I said later on in another statement, we have whitewashed Pride to the point where we don't recall any of the Black people that were actually part of the building of. I mean, Pride, Stonewall was a defense of Black bodies. Stonewall was started by a Black trans woman who was defending a Black butch woman. And you got to remember, back in '69, being Black and butch was essentially, and if I'm wrong, Aria, correct me, but being butch back in 1969 was essentially saying that you're living as a man, because that was the only way that Black butches could be safe. So, you know, it's a very particular way that incident happened, and people don't remember that. You know, a lot of white people who reached out to me said they had no idea that there was an actual Black butch woman involved, which means to me they probably allowed themselves to forget that Marsha P. Johnson was Black. You know, I've heard and seen a lot of things about Marsha P. Johnson that was shocking in LGBTQ media. And last night I actually made a statement at Pride where I talked about how, you know, we have a culture where a lot of organizations have been created by Black LGBTQ, I'm going to say, forefathers and foremothers who were created 25, 30, 40 years ago to support Black people, because there was no space for them in Black LGBTQ movements. You know, David Johns from the National Black Justice Coalition talked about how when neighborhoods, quite frankly, like the Castro, were created, they were not created for Black people. They were created for white gay people to create political and social capital and power. So you've always had that element where Black people were here. And, you know, yes, we can have ball culture, no shade to ball culture. We all love it. But, you know, we know that people steal from ball culture. We know that people steal from Black LGBTQ culture, and Black straight people do that all the time. I always tell people about Cardi B when she does it. Okay, they were doing that on Noah's Ark 15 years ago. So, you know, there's so many layers to all of that. And I think that I've lost track of the question by now, because I knew Michelle wanted me to unleash. I think that for me, it goes back to something that Aria said about the racism towards Black people in San Francisco and the racism towards Black LGBTQ people in particular. You know, I've spoken with Aria about having whole hit pieces written about me by LGBTQ media in San Francisco, for no other reason than being, you know, the mean Black lady who's carrying out whatever is going on in San Francisco Pride. And as a machine, Pride allows that to go on unchecked. You know, I've stated it out loud, like, y'all know this is racist, right? And people are like, oh yeah, you're right. Like they literally don't see it. And the thing that bothers me is not even just in LGBTQ movements, but a lot of white people and non-Black people don't see it until somebody dies or until we literally have to point it out. So right now we're in a space right now where so many organizations are quote unquote pivoting because we're in a moment and they want to center Black lives. But as I told someone in our organization, I said, we wouldn't have to pivot if you were already centering Black lives. It wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't take a lot of work. So I think that this is a time right now, number one, where we need to be educating people about about Black queer history. We need to be educating people about the spaces and the organizations that were created because Black people were not welcome. So we need to talk about even things like the Atlanta Black Pride, which is a baby of LA Black Pride, because they did not feel safe and comfortable at regular LA Pride. So we need to talk about all of those. But I want to also say, like Natalie and Aria said, we need to not treat this as a moment. Like this needs to be the standard going forward.
Can I interject something else?
Yeah, please.
I think what people forget is that the LGBTQ community is a microcosm of the larger United States community. The same issues that are happening in the South are happening inside the LGBTQ community. It's no different. And so when people talk about, oh, I'm queer, or, you know, however they identify underneath the rainbow, it's, I know what oppression looks like. And they want to like attach being part of that community with knowing exactly what it means to be Black in America. And they are not the same. I'm sorry to tell you, they are not the same. If you are a queer white man, you will never know what it's like to be Black in America. I don't care how, you know, oppressed you think that your life is. Just talk to a trans Black woman. Just have a conversation. Just understand that you will never get it. And so I want us to get to a place where we stop making people, we start holding people accountable for the fact that these aggressions happen within our community. And just because you are part of this community does not mean you're somehow immune to, or it doesn't mean that you're somehow, cut off from, ever showing microaggressions or ever being racist or ever doing this, because that's not the case. We all see it every time that we go to Pride. Somebody says something, somebody does something. And it starts to bring it back that, as much as I enjoy being a part of this movement and enjoying being part of these organizations, I still feel like an outsider because I'm not a cisgendered white male. I still feel like this isn't my movement because I'm not this. And at the end of the day, that's unacceptable. And so if we're going to change it, like, they have to take a step back and check themselves, which doesn't always happen. And it's hard to say to somebody, you need to check yourself, when it feels like we always get this dialogue of, oh my God, why does it always have to be a race issue? Why does it always have to come and be this? I'm here for you. I love you. We're in this together. But yet you take no action at all, or even self-reflection at all, to even see how you're contributing to it. So, sorry.
No, thank you. John, I actually wanted to ask a question that would segue to that. Is that okay, or do you have a burning question you want to jump in? Because I know we like to tag team. Well, I think that, there's like 3 questions that I wrote down that I'll just put it all into one. We started to also see discussions online with, other activists within the LGBTQ movement who reminded us that, Pride was a riot. And then I also heard about the White Night riots, and people wanted to remind us about the White Night riots. And if you don't know, that happened in San Francisco after the assassination of Harvey Milk, and Dan White, the murderer, didn't get a tough enough sentence. It was actually horrible, and a riot ensued here in San Francisco. And so, but at the same time, I was conflicted as a person in the community, because I didn't feel that it was productive to conflate the two. What the Black community is going through, and saying that we need to be rioting because as queers, we are used to rioting. I'd love to hear your perspective on what building equity actually means, and if this is the moment, this is the revolution, this is the moment of change. Most people out there protesting are calling for the defunding of the police, calling for investments in our community. Would love to hear your perspective on not conflating the two, and actually talking about the solutions for change, and how us as non-Blacks need to be a part of that change. We'll start with Aria.
Ooh, I'm trying to get my thoughts together. So what does equity look like now?
Yeah, because I think that's part of it, is building equity, and not just go. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're talking about it. We're starting to talk about it, and it's a global conversation. This is not just in America. You've got thousands upon thousands of folks who are protesting, and yes, mad as hell over the killing of George Floyd and the police brutality. But you also have Black leaders out there back on the streets, pulling in their community, calling for, the defunding of police and law enforcement, calling for more investments into community education, healthcare. I think that's what equity looks like. And then you touch upon it. I mean, as the executive director of the very first transgender cultural district, that is equity, in my opinion. You've got a piece of the city that is recognizing Black trans women in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the context of the LGBT community, something that I would like to see us build out is to really stop minimizing the fact that anti-Blackness is ever present, even in queer spaces. And just because you sleep with Black people does not mean
Aria.
I'm just, context. I have been on social media. I've been seeing, a lot of white and non-Black people of color, queer folks, sort of say, stop protesting, stop this, all lives matter, or all queer people, or what have you. And, Audre Lorde says we're not single issued people. And I think people ignore that our experience as Black, queer, and trans people is a compounded worldview, right? And I think in terms of, I think as a queer community, we've also become distant from rioting, right? We have not had to riot for our rights in a while. And so there is a way in which when Black people are rioting, it is heavily critiqued in a way that it's not. If it's queer folks about, the overturn of Prop C, or, is it Prop C? Okay, gay marriage not passing the first time around, right?
Prop 8.
And then, what did we do? Trans people, we said it's more than gay marriage, and nobody listened to us, right? Nobody was listening to us. It was about gay marriage. Gay marriage needs to be legalized, and we'll get to Black trans people later, right? And so there's been this tendency in the LGBT community to really minimize how anti-Blackness plays a role. And yeah, in the context of LGBT community, and building equity, we have to have efforts that are led and informed by Black, queer, and trans people. When it comes to social justice, we have to be in the room. We can't just be a population that's written into a grant. We actually have to be in the room and have a decision-making role. When we think about socialization, it's not enough to have a Black DJ and to play Black music and to have a white and non-Black people of color audience. It's no longer okay. If we're not making ways for access, because when we talk about the Castro, I think something that gets glossed over is how those clubs banned Black people, right? And they found ways to do that. Those nightclubs, those bars have had a long racist history of not allowing Black people into those spaces, Black, queer people. Yeah. And, of course, our advocacy with the trans district is to create our own solutions. And that was birthed out of the fact that no one was giving us opportunity. Even queer people were not giving Black and brown trans people opportunity, economic advancement opportunity to get out of our disparity. And so it's very popular to talk about the term privilege, right? And to sort of, we always do this thing, I think culturally now, where we're like, oh, I'm a person of privilege. And I'm like, I'm tired of having that conversation. What are you doing with that privilege in the space that you're in to shift things around? That's how the transgender district was even born. When you go to San Francisco pre-COVID, and I'm sure after, and you go to Starbucks and you go to these different companies, do you ever see trans people there? No. Black trans people, brown trans people, no. We don't have economic power in the same way that gay white people have developed, right? Or political power in the same way that gay white people have developed. And that needs to be extended going forward. And our voices need to be in the room instead of advocated on behalf of. I know that was a lot, I'm sorry.
No, the question is meant for you to say a lot. I know there's a lot there in the question in itself. Carolyn.
I think first about the conflation of white Knights riot?
Yeah, it's just the overall rioting, the history of rioting in the LGBTQ movement. We obviously, yes, we know that. That's part of our history. That is why we, started Pride. But it just was my personal opinion, actually, that I thought conflating the two, the Black rights movement and rioting in the Black community and also, the LGBTQI community kind of takes away from what but all three of you had talked about in the beginning of the program, which is your own lived experiences, and they're necessarily the same. That was part one. And then part two of it was, it's one thing to make a connection right now, if you're non-Black and LGBTQI, that this is happening, the injustices that we face, and we're all in this together. Well, the conversation shouldn't just stop here on the streets as we're protesting. What is the change? And I listed a couple examples of Black leaders who are out there calling for defunding of the police, putting more money into Black communities. Those are two things. Would just love to hear your perspective on what that change might look like, and even further explain why conflating the two could be ineffective.
Conflating the two is ineffective because it goes back to, number one, as I said, the neighborhoods and coming out movement that was created to give political power to white gay people, specifically white gay men, who still to this day literally need to feel oppressed. And I think that fighting because Dan White getting off for Harvey Milk's murder was absolutely a tragedy. Yes, that is a tragedy. We are talking about fighting for a systemic epidemic of Black people being killed. That does not diminish the fact that Harvey Milk should not have been murdered, but that means that you have to look at the grand scheme of what people are fighting for. People are fighting for a whole race, essentially, of people to be seen as human. It's absolutely not the same thing. And it's always incensing to me, and I'm not going to just put it on white gay men. I'm going to put it on just white queers, because it could be white gay men, it could be white trans women, I see it in a lot of different spaces. This need to deny the real oppression of Black people, specifically Black queer people, specifically Black trans women, all the time. I've been in situations where I've had to call out, this is something that's being specific to me because I'm a Black woman, and I've gotten, well, I'm gay. Okay, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And I think that, to Aria's point about access and equity, I was recently reading a book by 4 women who have been what we call power brokers in the Democratic Party. And they talked about how one thing that they were taught is that once you get into the space, you are supposed to immediately start looking around, calculating who's in the space, how many folks are not in the space, to start trying to make ways to get people into the space and to the table. But I think right now in 2020, we are in a specific time where the world is crumbling around us. Buildings are burning, businesses, like whole corporate entities, are going bankrupt because they've been out of business or closed for so long. We have an opportunity right now to rebuild everything. I'm a church going person, and so I'm just gonna give the, of course, necessary biblical reference to Noah and the ark. We have an opportunity to see this whole thing crash and fucking burn and rebuild it. But we have to be willing to do that work. We can't let the people that rebuild it be the ones who have the money to rebuild it immediately. We have to demand that we are there with them while we are doing the rebuilding. And that sometimes is the work. Places like, I'm going to keep calling them the Castro. I always call myself a West Hollywood gay because I came out in Southern California. So places like West Hollywood and some of the other gay districts, they're going to have to do the work as far as making those spaces equitable. So what is that? That's affordable housing. Something that as a community we are thinking about, but we're thinking about making sure that these gay districts look like us, look like America, as Jesse Jackson used to say. So there's so much into making a space or making a community equitable. And I think a lot of people right now in this moment, yes, you should listen to Black people, but there's so much more than just listening. Because I'll tell you right now, growing up in the church, I've also learned there's some Black folks who gonna fight you. And I'm seeing that today. You have to really make sure that you are surrounding yourself with Black folks who are doing the work and who are about everyone and who are not being self-serving. Some people in our community do not have what we call the gift of discernment. And that is definitely going to be needed as we rebuild and create equity and create access in the community.
There's a lot here, a lot to unpack. One of the things that I think we need to do is we need to dismantle this mindset that we have reached this level of freedom that is, I think, in a lot of people's faces. But when they see some atrocity happen, they go and protest, but then they go right back to doing the normal everyday thing. It is not enough to protest. It is necessary, and I support it all day long. And I will not tell anybody how to protest. You do it whatever way you feel is fit. You do you. But we have to dismantle this view that things have ever been good, that things have ever been great, this is just history repeating itself in a different way. This is nothing new. We've lived this, but we're not learning our lesson. And we continue to let the news cycle go, and then we forget it. And then somebody brings it to our attention, or it's a year anniversary, and we're like, oh, let's sing Kumbaya. And then we go on. Another thing, and it was like when Ari was talking, there's like a number of things pop into my head. And one of the issues that I see we're facing right now is that we have a lot of groups that are really anti-Pride right now, because Pride has never been a space that has welcomed everybody. And that is what I want to see break down, so that everybody is a part of this space. But it's hard right now because there are so many people who are like, cops don't make me feel safe. Where is our trans representation? Where are people of color representation? This is not my space. And it makes me so disheartened when we have a community that is broken. And people want to get mad at those individuals who are shouting, these things are not okay. But at the end of the day, they're not the ones that are wrong. It's the Pride organizers that are wrong, because they're allowing it to continue. And as a Pride organizer, I will put myself in that position to say, I'm here to make that change, but I haven't done it all yet. And so I'm taking responsibility to say, I still have work to do. And I think that's what we need people to do, is take responsibility and say, I haven't done the shit. I haven't done the work. I have to do the work. And I can't sit here and say that, oh, I'm part of the community and I've got so much love and this, that, and the other. And then go to a board meeting every month and say, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And then 3 years down the line, we're still in the same position that we were, but it makes you feel good to say, I stand in solidarity. To go back to conflating the two, people think when something looks similar that it's got to be the same. Just because it feels similar, it looks similar, it does not mean that it's the same. It is not the same struggle. It's not the same problem. But people want to feel connected somehow, and so they claim it as their own. This isn't y'all's. This doesn't belong to you. We all know who this belongs to, and this belongs to Black lives. And it is okay to say Black Lives Matter. People always want to bring in, what about everybody else? Everybody matters. We all know this. Stop saying it. Everybody's tired of it. Black Lives Matter. Deal with it. If you can't say that, then you're a part of the problem. If you have a problem with putting that out in the forefront, you are the problem. And I don't have a problem telling people they are the issue. And then another thing is, how do we create more equitable spaces? It's got to be from community activism, but it has to be a change in policies. And it has to be supporting groups like Campaign Zero, who, I don't know if you guys have heard about the 8 Can't Wait when it comes to, these are the 8 steps that you could take to actually reduce the amount of killings done by cops, the amount of force that is used by cops. These are things that already should be done. And so taking into consideration that people are already doing this work is already out there. People have been doing it forever, but paying attention to what people are doing and then putting our money and our support with those individuals who have already done the work. This isn't something new. This isn't something people weren't aware of. People are already out here fighting for our rights, but we are ignoring them, and we have to stop. I'm sure there's like a ton of other things, but
I don't want to be like, oh, okay, we're done with the program. No, John.
Actually, I want to take off right where you were going, Natalie, and that was, okay, so the Commonwealth Club, we're doing what a lot of organizations are doing. We're looking root to branch, all that kind of stuff is like, what are we doing wrong? What can we do differently? In terms of programs, what would be a good program that you think we could do that would educate people who need to know something about some of the things you just mentioned? Was it 8 Makes Great, or?
It's 8 Can't Wait from the Campaign Zero.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, would that be something that if more people knew about it,
absolutely
would help? And any other suggestions of things that we could do to use our platform, our bullhorn here?
I think, John, partnering with projects that have been doing that work, like Showing Up for Racial Justice, is a project that actually brings white folks together. And I believe it's conversations led by white folks to white folks on sort of what is white supremacy and like because there's always, when there isn't a political education, people react emotionally. So whenever we talk about white supremacy, white people are like, what do you mean? I have a Black cousin. I love Black people. And I have a neighbor. And it's like, no, we're not talking about you. We're talking about how we have a culture, all of us engage in it, right? Violence against trans women is a part of white supremacy, right? So it is a culture that we all engage in. And so if we're to dismantle that and to actually show up for racial justice, Commonwealth Club, I think, would be amazing at hosting a session in partnership with those projects that have been doing that work, that can translate what we're saying to an audience that wants to understand and needs the patience and the emotional capacity to support them in their paradigm shift.
It's like, I think her name is Jane Elliott. She was the professor who would go and to do those teachings on what racism actually was. And it was this white woman having this conversation with these white spaces. And so they started to feel uncomfortable, but it was quote unquote safe space for them to have those conversations. And sometimes you need to hear it from somebody that looks like you so that it actually registers. So I 100% agree, creating space for people to have those conversations, because I know a lot of people of color are tired of having to have those conversations. We don't want to keep saying the same thing over again.
I do want to add that I do think that education does need to extend to non-Black people of color as well.
Agreed.
Agreed. In San Francisco, a lot of times I have found that it has actually been API and Latinx folks who uphold a lot of anti-Blackness by comparison to white folks.
And they believe that because they're people of color, it doesn't count.
Right. And that's always the go-to is, well, I'm a person of color too, or I'm an immigrant, and and that's there, and there's always this assumption that sorry, someone keeps texting me. There's this assumption that we are playing oppression Olympics. That when we as Black folks are in the space and we're saying this is happening to Black queer folks, this is happening to Black trans people, it's like, oh well, I'm a person of color too. Like I didn't mean it, and you guys are just playing into, I'm having issues with this, or Latinx people are having issues with that. We're never not acknowledging that those issues exist, right? I feel like I went on a tangent, but I feel like we're not ever acknowledging, or we're not ever saying that that oppression. First of all, oppression is a spectrum, and so everyone is experiencing oppression in some way, whether you're poor or undocumented. Like there are obviously levels and impact, and that everyone is on the scale of oppression, right? Unless you're rich and part of the 1% and white, more than likely you're going to experience some form of oppression. But there's also sort of systemic, institutional, and social anti-Blackness. When we're addressing that, the understanding is that if we liberate Black folks, especially Black folks with intersectionality like Black, queer, and trans people, then everyone else is liberated too. But we cling to our own stuff that we don't want to see where the other person is coming from. And so I think having those dialogues, those town halls, and those moments for people to be unfiltered and have conversation and to begin a paradigm shift would be absolutely necessary for Commonwealth Club going forward. And I think it'll make a difference in helping folks catch up to where Black folks for liberation are right now.
And I just want to, throw into that, I cannot underestimate the importance of having white folks who do anti-racist work. We had a situation, with San Francisco Pride when I was going through a tough time with a particular board member who I'm very, very close to. But I started to feel like it wasn't really being heard when I was saying this thing is happening because of racial issues. And I said, look, we need to engage this other individual who is a community member, but who I know does anti-racist workshops and just work in the community. And it, as Natalie said, sometimes it does need to be heard from someone who grew up like you, someone who was socialized like you. We need to have the conversation about the ways in which white people are socialized, what is racist and what it means to be racist. this idea that being racist is just being mean. And if you're just nice, then you're not racist. And racist as a slur that as soon as they hear it, they just get on defensive and they're not really listening to what you're saying. So it is important to have the Jane Elliott's of the world out there, doing that work. Yeah. And the Oppression Olympics is a real deal thing. When you start throwing that into the mix, when people start pulling out their different parts of their identity, that's a real, not game changer, but it amps up the conversation.
I can't believe it, but we have we're almost through with our program. I know there was a lot there. Natalie, did you have anything to add to that?
I think before we end, I just want to thank you all for letting me be a part of this conversation. And I want to do this every day. Like, have conversations with people who get it. Do you know what I mean? Like, have conversations so that we can actually make some change. But then I want that conversation to turn into action, and I'm ready to get my hands dirty. I'm ready to continue doing the work, and I'm ready to bring in new voices. And something that Carolyn said earlier is like looking around, seeing who's missing, but also looking around, seeing who could take your place, because we want to build a generation, the next generation, to be leaders in this movement. And I just hope that somebody watching is like, all right, I feel activated. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to do something.
Absolutely. I mean, we have about 8 minutes left, and John, I just wanted to check in with you to see if we had any other questions that you might be taking from the audience.
Well, it's not a question, and it's been in the chat room for a while, and we kind of talked about this already, but I'll bring it up just because someone did say it. Someone who says, Pride Month, when half of the people making bogus police calls on Black people identify as being gay. Gay people are practicing racism daily, but we should look right past that, huh? So someone echoing some of what we were talking about earlier of the racial problem within the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. Personally, like for me, the work, I want to admit that the work is hard, and you constantly have to take yourself out of it when you're a non-Black person. The flow of my social media feed from my own API community and their comments, especially centered around the looting and the resharing of video clips of Black folks and the destruction of buildings and all of that, and kept saying, this is why are they doing this? And what they mean. And having to even unpack that conversation and stop it and say, okay, well, why are you generalizing an entire community, and then equating that to criminal offenses or violence? Like, I think that the dialogue, starting from the dialogue, is super important. But I also think it's absolute time that we make some changes, like we've been saying. So to end the program, it's the last 6 minutes. It is Pride Month. I think we're all admitting that, there's something here. There's something different about this time around. And I think there is an opportunity for us to do more. If you could just share your last final thoughts and some words for everyone who's going to listen, who's going to tune in, who's not Black, who's LGBTQ, and other, and what we've talked about some specific things, but just maybe it's words of, you could wag a finger or you can inject words of hope, but we leave you with the last words. Aria.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me speak freely today. My last words, that sounds so dramatic, but for me, it's really about coming from the nonprofit space and the social justice realm, having LGBT-led orgs really shift the things that are happening in their organizations, and having more than just one Black leader. Start with 3, maybe go up to 5, it's a process. But I think shifting that and bringing marginalized voices back into queer and trans efforts it's the only way that we're going to be effective. And I think everyone can advocate for that in their way and in their networks and in their workplaces, on their Zoom conference calls, and having those conversations and not ignoring what's happening.
Natalie.
I mean, I'm going to shake a finger a little. I think it's important that we continue to say that the problem still exists, and, you know, we can sing Kumbaya and we can do a whole bunch of other things, but it doesn't really change anything. So like Aria said, like, check yourselves, check your orgs. Are they living up to what they say they stand for? And I want people to stop having so many opinions about what they think is the struggle of Black individuals. I want people to just listen to the stories and just take them in, and maybe you'll learn something, and maybe it'll be less challenging for you the next time somebody says something to you about, you know, Black Lives Matter, or why your organizations aren't running effectively, or why people still don't feel like they have a seat at the table. I would just really like a lot of people to close their mouths, open their ears, listen first. I think we can't take action until you really begin to understand, and like, let us do the work we need to do and allow us to really exist inside those spaces, not just be a token. This tokenizing has been a major problem in everywhere. So that's my thing. It's just have faith that we got this, and we need your support, but we're gonna do the work that we need to do. And we'd love for you to come along in this journey, but you've got to get to that space where you can understand what your role is.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And Carolyn.
I think that one thing that is very important to me, and I know this is something you and I have worked on, Michelle, we have a lot of Black women. I mean, we have 3 Black women right here who are in leadership positions in Pride organizations. We have another incredible Black woman tomorrow with Aria and I, Imani Rupert Gordon, who is the new executive director over at NCLR. And, you know, we have a lot of Black folks, and especially Black women, who are in leadership. We need to do a better job of supporting each other, you know, because we're in a time right now where people are seeing T-shirts and seeing hashtags that say support Black women. So they'll put Black women in leadership, but you have to actually listen to those people that you put in leadership, and you have to let them lead. And, you know, sometimes that becomes hard when we are not also supporting each other. So we need to make sure I'm happy that we're having this conversation, because a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that I think that we're all seeing either in our organizations, our organizations around us. I'm thankful for the conversation that we'll have tomorrow, because I think more Black LGBTQ leaders need to be talking honestly about what's going on in our community. And one thing that is not even LGBTQ specific, but that we need to do better in, is we need to have better engagement with our elders. You know, our elders went through a moment or a time where they were fighting so hard to have a seat at the table. Sometimes it's hard for them to support young folks who are now at the table. And I always say that I was raised in this community by some incredible Black elders, whether it be from, you know, Los Angeles, whether it be from Oakland, whether it be from Detroit, whether it be from New York. But it takes a lot to be an elder. And a lot of times those communications get broken down, and that also ends in loss of information. That ends in loss of legacy. So we need to strengthen our intergenerational communications. We need to strengthen our support systems, because as we're asking for more Black people to be in leadership in these white spaces, because these LGBT organizations are super white, we need to do a better job of supporting each other.
And we need to defund police.
What's that, Aria?
And we need to defund the police.
And that is
the defund San Francisco police.
And that is the end of the program. Defund the police. Those are the last words.
Last words that will be spoken.
Those are the last words here on the program, at least the Michelle Meow Show. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to you who've tuned in, and please support the work, especially the organizations, the work of our panelists today, and then continue to do the work. Do something. Change is here. Change is now. John.
You're on mute, John.
I have nothing to say worth hearing, I guess. Thank you to our panelists. Great to see you. Two of you, seeing you again. Natalie, nice to meet you. And thank you everyone for watching this and listening to this on the podcast with hopefully open ears and open minds and open hearts.